Welcome to NEK-TV and Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan, where we get it straight. We have two amazing guests today. I have Christina and I have Ben, and I'm going to allow each of them to introduce themselves because we're going to be talking about the ethics bill and the status. And we had a show where we had the Ethics Commission on, and Ben was here as well. And now we need to get serious, and we need to find out the ramifications of what's going on, the status, and what does this really mean? So, Christina, would you be so kind from Australia and reintroduce yourself, and then I'll pass it to Ben to reintroduce himself, and just tell us a little bit about, who you are, your position, and then we'll shift it to Ben, and then we'll get started.
Sure. I'm Christina Sivert. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Ethics Commission. So I've been in that position for about 3.5 years now. So I used to say I was new. Guess I'm not so new anymore, but the Ethics Commission, compared to ethics commissions in other states, is still relatively new, about 8 years old. And yes, I'm currently on vacation in Australia. So that is why it is so dark where I am. It's 11 o'clock at night.
I was going to say, it's
That's
late
right.
at night.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. And it's a holiday today, right?
The King's birthday, yes. I had a momentary, what, there's a King of Australia, then I realized no.
There you go. Okay, Ben, bring it on.
Good morning. My name is Ben Kinsley. I am the Executive Director of Campaign for Vermont. We are a statewide nonprofit organization focused on good public policy that helps everyday Vermonters. And one of the key ways of doing that, in our opinion, is having transparent and accountable governmental structures. So that includes, state and local municipalities. And, we think that when, those organizations are running well, it benefits Vermonters.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about the Ethics Commission, the status now, and the bill. Okay, Christina, do you want to let us know the intent of the original bill, when it was formed, where you all went, what you thought the law was going to be, how you were going to monitor, or what authority you had or were still trying to get for the Ethics Commission, and then we'll go into what's going on now.
Yeah, sure. So for the past few years since I came on, so we've been really trying to get more powers for the Ethics Commission, just to bring Vermont in line with, other 50 states. Because Vermont has been, we started with a real deficit when it comes to ethics. Other states started setting up ethics commissions and really taking ethics more seriously right after Watergate. And so, Vermont has been one of the slowest states to address governmental ethics. So we set up the Ethics Commission about 8 years ago, and it's really been only the last 3.5 years where there's actually been movement forward from that step. So in 2022, we established a state code of ethics to apply to state of Vermont government employees. And so we're very far behind in just getting that established, and we've been slowly moving forward. And last year was a really big meeting, not this current legislative session, but last year was a really big year for the Ethics Commission. And it just really felt like the legislature wanted to take those next steps and establish a real ethics accountability framework for the state. So the Ethics Commission was given hearing and investigatory powers when it came to state level complaints. It established a municipal code of ethics that applied to all municipalities in the state. And a few other things. We expanded the financial disclosure rules to cover, more officials, including county officials, and to request more information from officials in those disclosures. So we really made a lot of steps forward last year. It felt like really leaps forward for Vermont, but not leaps forward when we're comparing ourselves to other states. It was really kind of bringing us up to minimum standards was last year. So we're really looking forward to this year being able to start really offering services to municipalities, preparing for investigatory and hearing powers to the Ethics Commission when it comes to state complaints that were supposed to go into effect this next year. Really expected this to be a very quiet year where focus would be just on getting more staff for the Ethics Commission. because we currently only have 2 part-time staff members, myself and a part-time administrative assistant. And so we really didn't think that was going to be an issue this year at all. And we're really kind of shocked and surprised with how things went this year. There's a lot of changeover in the legislature. The committee chairs changed for the committees that we work with. And so instead of really moving forward the momentum from last year, we've taken huge steps back, unfortunately, when it comes to ethics in Vermont.
Christina, would you be so kind as to tell everyone what committees are actually involved with this ethics, the bill and, moving it forward? When you go and you testify or when you are speaking with the chairs, what are the committees? So besides government ops, what other committees might be involved?
It really is only government ops. So it's House Government Operations and Senate Government Operations. And when it comes to staffing, of course, appropriations.
So not judiciary?
No.
Okay,
No.
So it's purely GovOps that is the controlling committee out of the legislature.
And that was true going back to the original ethics bill that created the commission too, by the way. So I was involved in creating that piece of legislation. And the judicial committees didn't touch those bills. It was all government operations and appropriations, even off this far
So just
back.
appropriations because we want the money side of it, and then pretty much just government ops. Did you find that restrictive, Ben? Did you think that other committees should be involved?
We had a hard enough time getting it through government operations. So at the time, it felt like adding another committee to the mix would make the process more difficult to navigate. In hindsight, I think it could have been helpful in terms of navigating some of the overlapping jurisdictions. So there are, one of the things that's really confused legislators, especially this year, is how you can have overlapping jurisdictions when it comes to the conduct of government employees. And so a good example of this, we have overlapping jurisdictions today between federal and state law, right? You have overlapping jurisdiction there. Many parts of the country, you actually have 3 layers of overlapping jurisdiction where you have, county law and county level law enforcement, as well as state and federal. And that is certainly complex, but these are things we navigate all the time. When it comes to ethics, we have sort of a little bit of a different, overlap. You may have some municipal versus state overlap in jurisdiction, but really where the overlap in jurisdiction happens with ethics laws is between what ethics laws are supposed to be doing and what professional conduct rules are supposed to be doing. So you have folks that are doctors, lawyers, financial advisors, and those professions have professional regulations associated with their own, code of ethics, as it were, for that specific profession. And they have conduct boards that regulate that. So lawyers have one, judges have one, doctors have them, financial advisors have them. But some of those folks, like we have all 4 of those occupations also are state employees. And that's where you have this overlapping jurisdiction between professional conduct and the rules that govern that and the code of ethics, which is meant to cover all state employees, right? And is covering them as a function of their, of being a public servant versus a function of being having a specific job or a specific occupation. And that confusion has really caused some uncertainty in the legislature.
So my understanding as one of those licensed professionals who must abide by,
Correct.
The professional regulation is that code of conduct really is more for the individual or the firms owned by those parties. And we are bound to follow ethics rules, wherever they are, but the code of conduct is specific to us as individuals for our own
Correct.
license retention.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't misunderstanding, but maybe the legislature doesn't understand
There's
that, as most of them are not as involved with regulatory actions, and a lot of them don't even, and I apologize for this, but don't really understand what the licensed professionals are held accountable for,
and
how it
how it works.
works. And so that is something that is specific to the regulatory licensing holder, the person who's holding that license. So, and I want to get into that because I see some, not conflicts, I just see lack of understanding there, which is more of the confusion. Christina, can you please, we know now that the governor has actually let this law go into effect by not signing it. So, and he didn't rise to the level of a veto in his decision-making power. And so he said, okay, let's let it go through. He wrote a letter, and his opinion pretty much was, hopefully you'll deal with it going forward. So it's not like it's law the way it is and let's not look at it again. It's, I'm letting it go through, but we should continue to look at it. Am I missing that, or is that's the way I understood it? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I agree. And I was saying, we're really surprised that ethics became a topic this year because we're really expecting to just spend this year implementing what was passed last year. And I guess maybe I should explain, the bill H1 that was passed this year, what it did. And so it was a surprise to us to see what was a really non-controversial portion of the Act 171 that was passed last year, which was related to a consultation requirement. So the way the Ethics Commission works now is that a complaint is filed with us. We can't investigate it. So we have to pass it on to somebody else for the investigation. We were given hearing investigatory powers last year to going into effect this coming September. And so because we're so understaffed and we weren't anticipating becoming, fully staffed like a real ethics commission in other states that has, 12, 13, 15 people in it. So we said, okay, how can we make it so that, everyone has a common understanding of the state code of ethics, because the consultation requirement only applied to state level complaints. How can we ensure that everyone is, this law is applying equally to everyone, so everyone has the same understanding of what behavior is prohibited under the state code of ethics. So there's a consultation requirement that was discussed very early on in legislative session last year. It wasn't a surprise to anyone. People had a lot of time to consider it. That said, when we refer a complaint on, and even when we have investigatory powers, it's one that we aren't going to retain for ourselves because we just don't have the capacity to retain every complaint for ourselves. We will consult with the investigating body. The investigating body will get the complaint, they'll have the opportunity to review it, and then they'll have to come back to us and just discuss the facts of the complaint. So we can point out situations where we say, like, oh yes, we do think the state code of ethics applies here. We don't think it applies here, just so everyone has a common understanding. And so that was just very, pretty basic, a pretty good way to conserve resources, but just to make sure that everyone is being held to the same standards. And this year, H1 was a bill that proposed removing the consultation requirement when it came to legislators, the House and Senate ethics panel. Then it grew from there to not only remove the consultation requirement for legislators so that they wouldn't have to consult with us, but also the Professional Responsibility Board for attorneys, and also the Judicial Conduct Board for judicial officers. And then it grew from there in the Senate to actually put off our hearing investigatory powers another 2 years, which just kind of really came out of nowhere. And it's kind of puzzling they decided to put it off for another 2 years. Like, why not just one more year if you want to come back and discuss it next year? So that's where things stand now, as this bill has been passed that removed the consultation requirement, not just for those three that I mentioned, but for all branches of government. So now there is no more consultation requirement, and our investigatory and hearing powers have been put off for another 2 years.
So how many, if you're able, or if you know, or even able to let us know, how many complaints are out there that are going to be sitting there for a while right now?
So the complaints will be referred. It's just that they'll be referred on, so they won't sit anywhere. But the question is just that, when we pass it on, the investigating entity won't have the benefit of the consultation with us. And so I think last year, I'd say the total for like state complaints, I think we had about 20 state complaints. This year we have municipal complaints and state complaints. And I'd say this year, when it comes to municipal complaints, they're blowing the state complaints out of the water, just to give you a bit of, a sampling of what's going on with the Ethics Commission when it comes to municipal versus state in terms of numbers.
There's an
Sure,
element of this
and,
too, where there are some complaints that come in that there is no body
Yes.
to refer them to, and they're typically complaints about state officials, right? And so those are just getting stuck somewhere, right? Is that a correct interpretation?
Yeah, good point, Ben. So one of the things that's so concerning about putting off the Ethics Commission's hearing investigatory powers, and one of the reasons we got that in the first place, is that there are categories of state officials where there's no place to refer the complaint to. So that involves, statewide elected officials, but also certain members of boards and commissions. And so there were complaints that have come in since I've been here where we received them and there's just nowhere to send them. So that was one of the reasons why the Ethics Commission was given these powers. And so it's really puzzling and kind of like it's hard to comprehend why I decided to put off that for another 2 years, because there is a category of complaints that just can't go anywhere.
Okay. And you can't investigate them because you don't have that authority, so they just sit there.
Yeah,
Sit
exactly.
And then how long are they allowed to sit there? And if no action is taken, are they automatically decided that there was no issue?
Yeah, well, I should say that when you say sit there, they would be closed out because there's no place to refer them. So if they came to us, we have to say they would be closed out at that point because there's no place to refer them onto. Not because they weren't legitimate complaints, not because they don't deserve investigation, but just because there's nowhere to send them.
So thank you for your concern.
Well, that's troubling.
Sorry, we can't do anything.
Right. Well, that's troubling. I find that troubling anyway. Ben, you wrote under Campaign for Vermont a pro and con on this bill, and it was really thorough, and I thank you for that. Can you please bring our listeners up to speed on what you wrote, your pros, your cons, and your thoughts, and then we'll have Christina jump in on that, because I thought it was very easy to read, very well written, and you hit the majority of at least what I was thinking of, which I always applaud people who agree with me.
Fair enough.
So go right ahead.
Yeah, so I think, I would say we do this for a lot of bills that are kind of in our list of topics that we follow. Ethics is one of the ones we follow more closely than others. But we've done over 24 in-depth reviews on pieces of legislation this year. And we did do reviews on both the House and Senate version of H1, which are slightly different. Obviously, the Senate version, in our opinion, is a little bit better because instead of just getting rid of all of the oversight and enforcement authority, or at least significant chunks of it, the Senate only delays 2 years. But the problem with the Senate one is that it delays everything for 2 years, including the investigation piece, which the House version originally allowed for investigations to continue for those categories of complaints that there's nowhere to refer to. But I think one of the main things on both versions of the bill, essentially, it goes back to this confusion about, even for those complaints you are referring, there's overlap between professional conduct and ethics, and that sort of tension right now in the current system is interesting, because those referring entities, those groups that Christina is forwarding complaints to, are professional conduct boards in most cases. And so you have this tension of a professional conduct board whose job it is to oversee a specific occupation, is being given an ethics complaint for a violation of a statewide code of ethics, which is not their original intent of that board, to enforce a statewide code of ethics. Their original intent is to enforce the code of conduct for that specific occupation. And so you have this tension in the current system that didn't necessarily go away under the new framework that was supposed to be coming in September, that had passed last year. But it started moving us away from that tension, and the legislature is still very wrapped up in that, and the confusion between how these two systems overlap with each other, this professional conduct system and this ethics system. And a lot of the work I think we're going to be doing over the next year or two until this next deadline comes up is to help educate legislators and educate the public about how to navigate these sorts of things and how other states have navigated them. Because the vast majority of states have figured this out. When we passed the legislation to create the Ethics Commission, we were one of 3 states in the country that didn't have one. And we're still in the bottom 10 in terms of like the framework we've set up for enforcement powers. 36 other states by our count have some level of enforcement powers over all 3 branches of government. Vermont is still pretty far behind in that aspect. And we just passed a couple of years ago one statewide code of ethics so that there's a consistent standard for public servants regardless of where they're serving. But in terms of enforcement and oversight, we're pretty lacking right now.
And I know that, the licensed officials are held to a higher level of accountability, just
often
in
higher
general.
than the code of
But then
ethics.
is there a fairness? Oh, absolutely. You're held to a higher standard. I mean, that's
If
the
you're a
way it
lawyer,
is.
there's a very high
Okay, I
bar,
mean,
but that doesn't mean that the statewide code of ethics shouldn't be enforced if you're a lawyer and also a public servant, right? Because the code of ethics applies to you in your role as a public servant, not your occupation, not your.
And there you go. That's the key. But you're still held to that higher fiduciary standard regardless. And that's what you do when you take your oath and you get your license. You understand that is what it is. But what about, and Christina, maybe you can help here. What about the fact that a lot of elected officials are not held to a higher standard? I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's okay, I can do what I want. And, if I can convince the people to vote for me again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem that we're seeing here. So I think a lot of this really goes back to Vermont just being very far behind when it comes to kind of basic ethics standards and basic ethics accountability that other people have been experiencing in other states for a very long time. And so when we're talking, let's go back like briefly when we're talking about, being regulated in your profession versus, being regulated as an employee. So, I worked in the federal government. I worked for the Department of Justice. I'm a lawyer. And I've been a political appointee all at the same time. So when you're in that situation, you have, separate regimes to cover you, right? So there's the Board of Professional Responsibility, to law school in Hawaii. So I'm subject to those rules. Then I'm also subject to the federal government's, the DOJ's code of ethics. And then also as a political appointee, there's, separate rules that you have to follow. And this is just really standard stuff. So if you're acting as an attorney, then you're going to look at the rules of professional responsibility. When you're acting as a federal government employee, then you're looking at that code of ethics. And so the example I try to use, we've tried to use before the legislature to make it really simple for people to understand is, okay, if you're in a courtroom and you're representing a client, then the rules that are going to really cover you are going to be the rules of professional responsibility for you as an attorney. However, if you are working in state government and you're in a hiring committee, and it doesn't involve you acting, in your profession as an attorney, you're just acting as you're doing something that any other member of state government could do, then you're really going to be looking at the state code of ethics. So for example, if your brother applies for a job, then you're looking at preferential treatment, you're looking at the state code of ethics because you're not acting as an attorney. And that's the line we say, if you're doing something that anything that someone in state government can do, then look at the state code of ethics. And we use that in the legislative context as well. So we're talking about when legislators are acting, are they doing something that only a legislator can do, or are they doing something that anyone who works in state government can do? And that's kind of the dividing line when we're talking about the legislature, because there are some legitimate constitutional issues that come up. We're talking about what regime covers legislators when they're acting as legislators. So there's, constitutional protections for them when they're acting in a way that implicates core legislative functions, like voting on an issue or constitutional or committee assignments. But if they're sitting on a hiring committee, or sitting on a committee that's, determining a contract, who's going to get a contract for, something that's happening in the state house, they're not acting as a legislator, right? Anyone could do that job. And so you don't have protection from, trying to get your brother hired for that position. And so that's been something that's been very difficult, I think, to explain when we're before the legislator to those legislators who are newer, but also to the ones that haven't been involved in the discussions that we've been having before. the House and Senate Government Operations Committees this last few years. And so I don't think that that always gets through when we're talking about core legislative functions like voting or sitting on a committee. Those are exempt from the state code of ethics. We're talking about, something that any state employee can do, like accepting a gift or sitting on a hiring committee, then we're talking about the state code of ethics applying. And so that's really a dividing line that's there. I will say that there is something, when we're talking about levels of accountability within the legislature, I will say that there is a different standard for conflicts of interest when it comes to legislators, and they opted not to adopt the definition of conflict of interest that applies to all state employees for themselves. They kept it more limited. So they are the one group that has a more limited definition for some things than other state employees. They could have set a higher standard for themselves to match other state employees, but they didn't do that.
I would say,
To that point, Christina, it's my understanding that on the conflict of interest, the person owns the conflict of interest, and they're making their own decision on whether or not there is a conflict of interest. And that's pretty much the way I've seen it. Well, I make the decision of whether or not I have a conflict of interest, and I say I don't, therefore I don't. Have you seen issues with this?
So when it comes to the legislature, so because they do have a different definition of conflict of interest and it's much more narrow, we don't have anything to do with that really, because honestly, the times when conflict of interest is going to come up is related to a core legislative function. So on the side of the legislators, I don't really know what guidance they get. To be honest, I do know from public reporting, I think there's been maybe one or two cases in the history of the legislature where somebody has been found to have a conflict of interest, but that's not something that I know from, my own personal knowledge. It's just from what I've read elsewhere.
and that determination.
Yeah, just from when I was in there as a legislator, I mean, it was, here's their definition, and, you're supposed to state if you have a conflict of interest, and you own it. So, and that's pretty much what I've seen at the municipal level. It's like you make that statement and you make that decision. And then if nobody challenges it, it is what it is. But Ben, go ahead, because
Yeah.
I know you're...
So there is a mechanism we set up in the original legislation that created the Ethics Commission. At the same time that legislation went through, it also created a House and Senate ethics panel. And the function of those ethics panels are to review conflicts of interest that do relate, or other potential ethical violations that do relate to core legislative function. So voting on something or committee assignments or what have you, those things that are, constitutionally the privilege of the legislative branch of government. And so...
But to that, Ben, tell me just a little bit more so our listeners can understand that ethics panel. Are they not?
They are made up of legislators, yes.
So we're making our own decisions on our...
Feels a little bit like the fox guarding the hen house, I will admit.
I think it feels a lot like the fox guarding the hen house, like a little bit more.
And I agree with that. I think, there are some legitimate constitutional issues to navigate around. I think in a perfect world, what we've seen other states do is the Ethics Commission can investigate a complaint, determine if there's what the merits are, establish facts, and then submit that report to, if they believe a violation has occurred and that there's a corrective action is necessary, they submit that report along with the evidence to the legislative oversight panel. And then basically the role of the legislative oversight panel is not to establish facts, but to determine what to do with the report from the Ethics Commission. They can choose to censor the legislator. They can choose to do, any sort of corrective action at that point. Long term, that would be the ideal. The bill that was supposed to go into effect, the law that was supposed to go into effect in September, that's now suspended, would have required that those legislative panels consult with the Ethics Commission. So the Ethics Commission, I believe, Christina, correct me if I'm wrong, but you could have investigated and established some facts, submitted that in a report, and then it would have required that the House and Senate panels consulted with the Ethics Commission prior to arriving at a decision. And I think that was my understanding of how the legislation was going to work. That was supposed to go into effect in September.
Yeah, I think so.
which makes more
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it was. So the way it was going to work is that complaints that involve core legislative functions would just always go straight to the ethics panels, and then and that's the end of it for us. We wouldn't have any more involvement in it. And then complaints that involve non-core legislative functions, so implicate the state code of ethics, there would have been the option for us to retain them ourselves and conduct investigatory, you know, investigate and hold a hearing. But when it comes to enforcement, that would still be referred on for somebody else to enforce. And so it was divided into those two categories. Like, did this complaint involve core legislative function or non-core legislative function? The other option would have been for us, because we would have had to continue to refer on complaints for investigation because we didn't have the staff to handle it, to refer that complaint on, even if it involved a non-core legislative function. Refer it on, and then it would have required the House or Senate ethics panel to consult with us just to establish what our viewpoint was based on the facts of the complaint, as we knew them. Was the state code of ethics potentially violated here? So we're just passing on that knowledge, and that was really the sticking point. It was a really surprising sticking point. So we did, the Senate side had constitutional law scholars who said there's really no constitutional issue here, but that's what the legislature decided. They decided to remove the consultation requirement based on constitutional issues. We had constitutional law scholars testify that they didn't see any constitutional issues there. So you kind of have to wonder what actually is going on there.
Well, the argument changed in the Senate, which I think was interesting. And, I have thoughts on this whole, what happened this year in general. But the argument in the House was very much a constitutional argument. When the bill got to the Senate and these constitutional scholars started testifying on it, the narrative changed, and it wasn't about the constitutional issue of separation of powers as much as it was about the Ethics Commission doesn't have the resources to actually accomplish the tasks that we're giving them. And there's honestly more merit to that argument, I think, than the constitutional argument. But it was interesting to me that the narrative of why this legislation was necessary changed pretty significantly from the House to the Senate.
So
I would say it changed continuously, and the House side, it actually changed from week to week. So the specific arguments are being put forward, sometimes day to day. First it was a timing issue, then it was a constitutional issue, and it was a different one. So it really, once you kind of argued about one position that's put forward, then it suddenly would change to something else. So
yeah, and that's what I was going to say. It's like it started one way and then it just kept changing and changing and changing.
Yeah.
Ben, so as far as, say, like the municipalities are going, and Christina, whoever would like to answer this, it was my understanding that there were 2 liaisons or 2 assignments for municipalities. You needed to have 2 delegates for when these issues were referred. Was that incorrect?
No, I wouldn't say so. Every municipality is currently required to have an ethics liaison to be the point of communication with the Ethics Commission. And that's just, when we want to send out an email, when we created an advisory opinion related to municipalities, and we want to notify municipalities that has happened, or when a complaint comes into us and we need to refer it on to the municipality for investigation, we would refer it to that person. Okay, and so I think there's
Okay, so who does the investigation at the municipality levels?
And so it's left up to the municipality to determine what the best structure is for them. So it could be the select board. It could be that they designate, I think I've seen some municipalities designate like the town manager as being the person who's going to, start the investigation. Is it going to be referred directly to the select board? Are they going to hire somebody from outside of the municipality to act independently to conduct the investigation? So it's really kind of left up to the municipalities to determine their own framework depending on their resources and how they wanted to do it.
Or they can decide not to do anything. Is that correct?
Well, they have to have a complaint procedure in place, and so there has to be a process in place by which they handle the complaints, which is going to involve an investigation.
So
of course,
who monitors that? So say they have a procedure, where they have so many policies in place, and it's like, okay, it goes on a pile of papers in the corner somewhere, and they have a procedure that they've agreed to, and everybody's voted on, and then of course it's not used. So what happens then if the procedure's not followed? And how would you know?
It's going to be up to members of the public in that municipality to make sure the municipality is following their procedures. So, yes.
But they wouldn't know. The people in the municipality wouldn't know if they're not told that there was a complaint filed.
Yeah, I think the responsibility would fall back onto the complainant, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
because
that's kind of what I was
the
saying
complainant is
again, Ben.
notified, right, Christina? The complainant gets a notification that the complaint has been forwarded to the municipality, right? They're aware that that's happened.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but is there any authority for the Ethics Commission to follow up, or they just say, okay, it's sitting in the municipality's hands, and if we aren't aware of a resolution, if there was one, nor is it our business? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, that's basically how the legislation was enacted. Is that our only role is to receive the complaint, and we can talk to the complainant. I mean, basically, the Ethics Commission is a service, an organization that provides services. So the services that we provide when it comes to complaints are that the complainants can come to us, discuss the issue. We can talk them through the municipal code of ethics, the statewide municipal code of ethics, not individual municipal policies. Talk about whether or not the facts that they're presenting to us fit under that municipal code, and help them make sure that the complaint addresses the specific issues. And then we refer it on to the municipality. Once it gets referred on to the municipality, it's really out of our hands. I say that's the way it's supposed to work, but because we did not get any additional resources, any additional staffing, we've actually had to stop offering municipal services.
Yet municipalities, elected officials, specific ones who were required to take the ethics study that you put out, like they had to go for the training, correct?
Yes, and when I say we stop municipal services, we are still offering the training services. And so we have the training that's on our website. It's about 45 minutes long. So that's still there for everyone to take. If anyone has any issues or questions of the training, we're still there to help them with that.
So Ben, tell me about the pros of this bill, and then let's go into the cons.
So pros, the pros are potentially it gives us time to get staffing resources in place for the commission so that these services can actually be provided. It's hard to find anything positive beyond that, though. The downsides are, Vermonters are going to have to wait 2 more years before we see any sort of oversight, and that was a piece Christina didn't touch on, but the law that was supposed to go into effect in September that has now been delayed 2 years did have a report back provision. So if a complaint was referred, the entity that it was referred to would have had to report back to the commission on the status of that complaint. So there is at least a feedback loop in place to say, like, okay, nothing's been done with this. Why has nothing been done with this, right? In current state, we don't get any of that. So, again, what was going to go into effect is not perfect. Certainly not perfect, and not at the level that most other states have done, but it was at least a step in the right direction. So downsides are, Vermonters are going to have to wait 2 more years for any sort of oversight. Complaints that they file about public servants are going to have limited impact, unfortunately. I think in today's world where faith and trust in government institutions is at one of the lowest points in our history. I think having these tools is really important, right? We know that no one's saying there's rampant corruption in Vermont state government or municipalities. No one is saying that. What we're saying is, we want to make sure Vermonters can trust that public officials have their interests in mind, right? And when there are concerns, there's somewhere to take them, and that those concerns will be taken seriously.
And I'd just like to add.
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I'd just like to add when we're talking about getting resources in place to kind of handle the responsibilities we've been given. The legislature had the opportunity to do that. They chose not to. We went into the session with a full expectation that we were going to be getting the resources that we needed. We had asked for just 2 additional full-time positions in order to actually be able to do this job. in the way that we've been requested to do this job. We went into the session with the expectation that we would be getting more resources this year. There wasn't really any controversy about that. And both in the House and Senate side, the positions that were included for us were pulled out at the very, very last minute. And so it was definitely a decision, a proactive decision that was made to not give us resources. So while we're talking about, it's a bit of a catch-22, but, it's also an intentional decision that was made to not give us resources.
Are you taking this as a very strong message that, hey, we wanted to have ethics in place, we believed in it, we think it was really important, but oh my goodness, when we did this, we forgot it was going to govern us as well. So now we are going to totally turn this backwards and make this go away. Are you fearful that that's where they're going?
Yeah, and maybe I'm speaking too bluntly, but yes, I think that since I've been here, I'm from Vermont, but I spent a lot of my career outside of Vermont. I came back, 4 or 5 years ago, and I've kind of continually been surprised at the things that are controversial in Vermont when it comes to ethics and getting these rules into place. It's been really shocking to me, to be honest, over the last few years, and I've noticed that there are different, kind of strains of arguments that are happening, and sometimes the kind of, I don't want to say anti-ethics side, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
And on the pro-ethics sides, there's tension between them, and sometimes the anti-ethics coalition wins, and sometimes the pro-ethics coalition wins. And this year, it really felt like it was the anti-ethics coalition that had the strongest voice, and that's basically what happened this year. And yes, I do think it was when they.
I hear you. I hear you. What about you, Ben? What's your thought here? Because you were such a strong proponent of this bill when it first came out.
Yeah, well, I think, our approach to ethics in general has been crawl, walk, run. And we've struggled to just get out of the walk or the crawl phase. This transition that we're talking about, this piece of legislation that would have gone into effect this year, was really the transition from the ethics commission getting their feet under them to starting to have some authority, because really today the ethics commission has really no authority. They're a organization that can provide training resources and a catch-all for complaints or concerns about the conduct of public officials. They can't investigate them. They can't establish facts. They can't. They have no oversight authority. They have no enforcement authority. So they're just collecting those. It's a single point of contact to collect complaints and then forward them elsewhere in state government. So there's very little today that actually, contributes to that faith and trust in government that we talked about. I think one of the things that is really concerning to me in how this legislation played out this year is one of which is just the fact that the bill's name was H1. And for those that don't know, the bills get numbered in terms of the order in which they're drafted. So H1 means this was the first bill drafted by the House of Representatives this year, the very first one that Legislative Council went in and wrote up. The number one priority for the House, the first bill they got in, was this bill. And it was to repeal this new oversight provision around ethics. And then the other one that was also quite concerning to me is we saw Legislative Council, which is the lawyers that work for the legislature. They're the ones that draft the bills, the actual language in the bills. They're supposed to be a nonpartisan, impartial, group of lawyers that does this work, and they were actively lobbying for this bill.
Let's talk about that, because you're absolutely right. They're supposed to be there to draft the bills based on the constitutionality of it, and then the actual discussion takes place in the committees before the various, whether it be the House or the Senate, where they make the decisions on what goes into the details of a bill. The attorneys are supposed to be there not as lobbyists and not as influencers, but they are supposed to be there to say, we need to reword this because it's not constitutional, not for any other real strong reason. So can we talk about that? Because I have a problem with it.
Yes, and I've worked in the State House since 2012, and I have never seen a situation where, typically if there's a problem with specific language, like, oh, this doesn't conform with current statute, or, there's a constitutional issue we need to navigate around here, then maybe legislative counsel would say, hey, you should be aware of this. You can choose to proceed how you want, but be aware of this conflict that would exist in law if you pass this. And that's typically how those types of conflicts are resolved. And I have never seen a situation where a lobbyist goes in and tells legislators they got something wrong. And that's literally what they said. They said a member of legislative council testified, not with a piece of new draft in front of them. They walked in and testified on this bill multiple times without a new draft or language to review or any of the things that legislative council typically does, and said, you got this wrong, here's what you should do. And that happened multiple times in this process. And I have never seen that happen in the legislature in the decade plus that I have been in there. And that to me is also really concerning, because legislative council is supposed to be this impartial body, not trying to steer the outcome of legislation. They're trying to reflect the will of the legislature. And in this case, it really felt like the committees, especially the committees with newer members, which the House had a lot of new members this year, really felt like they were getting led around by the nose by legislative council on this bill. The Senate was more resistant to that because they had some more senior people on that committee, on their government operations committee, but there was still a clear heavy influence from legislative council on the whole process. And that to me is really bizarre and also concerning, because that's not supposed to be their role.
Right, it's highly concerning. Tell me who, if you know, on the Senate GovOps committee, who's the chair and who's on that committee? And then if you could tell me as well as on the House.
Yeah, on the Senate side, it's Brian Collmore as the chair. He's a senator from Rutland.
More experienced, and I could see why then the Senate would put more pushback on that and be more concerned.
And he, along with Allison Clarkson, who is I think she's the vice chair or the ranking member, I can't remember which, on that committee. Both of them were there on that committee when we passed the original ethics legislation back in 2017. So both of those senators have been there long enough to see the full spectrum of ethics legislation in Vermont. There are some newer members, like Tanya Vahofsky is, been there for a few years, but is still relatively new. Becca White has also been there for a couple of years, but pretty new. And then there's a brand new member as well that just got elected this past fall and has not been involved in any of this. So.
And who's the chair on the House side? Because I know there's been a change there as well. When you started, there was a lawyer who was the chair. And so when you started this bill, and he was very active in getting this bill going forward with you, I believe, correct? Who was the chair? I forgot his name, and I'm so
the chair
sorry.
last year, or the chair back in 2017?
Yeah, the last round when the bill first came out. He was there.
Mike McCarthy.
No, before Mike.
It was before Mike.
Sarah Copeland Hanses was the chair before.
That's right. Yeah.
Before Sarah.
Before Sarah was
he's a lawyer.
Meta Townsend, and then before there was a lawyer.
Oh, I'm missing. So maybe it wasn't the GovOps. Why did I think it was GovOps?
I think it's Representative Gannon.
He was
Gannon. He was vice chair.
There you go.
Vice
there
chair,
you go.
yes.
Okay. Right. And I know he was very involved in wanting this ethics bill to go forward the way you had it originally, I believe.
Yes.
Unless I'm mistaken, right? And so that's who I was thinking of. And when he was in there, at least, he had the legal background so he can understand the purpose of ledge counsel, and he would have been a seasoned and, able to assist when they came in more in the lobbying fashion.
Yeah, I think we're definitely feeling his absence in the House, because you're absolutely right. He came in from, having a legal background as well as having a financial services background, being very familiar with, the interplay between ethics and these professional conduct boards, and having.
And I think he was the chair of the House Ethics panel as well.
I think he might have been before Lalonde was.
Yeah, somewhere.
Yeah,
in
he was certainly on it. And I can't remember if he was chair or not, but he was definitely a voice for a long time in the House for how to do this properly. And I think this year, quite honestly, Christina sort of said this, like, this bill came out of nowhere. We got caught off guard by it too. And I think looking back on it, it's largely because in the House in particular, how much turnover has happened. Folks that have been on that committee, a lot of them left. The ones that had historical knowledge, ones that had like real world knowledge, a lot of those folks are gone.
So where do you see this going? I mean, is it, oh, well, we tried, goodbye, or is there going to be an aggressive push to get it back to the way it was? Do you know, Christina or Ben?
My feeling is this is step one in terms of trying to turn things back. And so my feeling is next year there's probably going to be an attempt to turn back the municipal ethics regime. Again, a lot of the issues that people kind of brought up as reasons why we shouldn't be moving forward now when it comes to staffing. The solution is just to give us staffing. We asked for a minimal amount of staffing. It was only two staff, two full-time staff people to complement our two part-time people. It's still a very small ethics commission, but we really thought it through and we're like, okay, this is what we can do. This is, what we can do with what we've been asked to do, and this is the staff that we need. And so it's a pretty minimal amount of staffing that we've asked for. So a lot of these issues can be resolved that way, but I just really worry that next year the arguments that are going to come at us are going to involve dismantling the responsibilities that we've been given versus just giving us the staffing that we need. And that really bothers me. As a citizen of Vermont, taking off my hat as executive director of the Ethics Commission, because what we see going on nationally. And so I know, the people of Vermont really feel like we're an ethical state and we want to be, countering national negative trends when it comes to ethics, because we're seeing very negative trends on the national level, dismantling of offices of inspectors general, just all over the place. And this current session, and they're still in session, they decided to follow that negative national trend instead of counteract it. And so for me, just as a citizen of Vermont, as a citizen of the country, that's really disturbing to me. And I am really worried about what's going to happen next year, because I don't think I see it's going to be the, same committee makeups, to be honest, same kind of like pressures on the legislators to move things backwards instead of move things forward. When I say move things forward, it's really just shoring up what was done last year, not even, moving forward in some kind of, great leaps and bounds to what we were given last year. It's just kind of keeping things as they were passed last year, and then giving us the staff that we need to actually effectuate those responsibilities that we were given.
So as somebody who's out there in various different roles, whether it be on boards or former legislator, former mayor, whatever it is, the people that I speak to, the constituent base, the people of Vermont, they want ethics oversight. That is what I'm hearing. They want more authoritative and enforcement from ethics oversight. They don't want just a not-for-profit style setup. Oh, hi, we'll give you a hotline number, or we'll give you training. They want the power and authority to be vested in an ethics commission that is really a commission that has the resources and that can really step and put in this oversight and put the citizens at ease. What's your feel on that?
I absolutely agree. I think that is what Vermonters want. We've heard that time and time again. We've done polling on that question. We've done petition drives on that question. It's pretty clear to us that Vermonters want and expect the best out of their public officials, and that doesn't. And that means having a process in place. And, one of the things that was said during legislative testimony is like, we don't have a bunch of ethical violations in Vermont. Look at New Jersey or whatever. And I made the point, the reason we hear about all of these ethical violations in New Jersey is because they have a robust accountability mechanism that whenever something happens that's untoward, everybody knows about it because it gets investigated and the findings are published. And did something happen or did something not happen? It's a little bit like the Florida man situation, right? It's not that all the crazy people live in Florida, right? It's that Florida has very aggressive public disclosure laws. So every police report becomes public and everyone and the newspapers pick it up. It's not like crazy stuff happens everywhere. It's just you hear about it in Florida because of how transparent they are.
Well, it's the transparency that's the issue, and that is what the people want. The people want the transparency. And you said, well, there's not a lot going on in the state of Vermont. How do we know?
We don't know. That's the
exactly
challenge,
right.
There's no mechanism to find out, right? And so the only mechanism you have right now is calling the Ethics Commission hotline and saying, hey, I think something happened here. And the Ethics Commission can't investigate it. They just forward it on usually to the same people that are being complained about. And
there you go.
What happens with it? Like no one ever hears about it again, right? That is the underlying problem is that, do I think that there's, again, like I said this earlier, do I think there's rampant corruption across the state? No, not necessarily. We do know that we have a cottage industry of embezzlers. That is a problem we have.
Right.
But but we have no mechanism to find out if something is happening, and that's the real problem. Is establishing those mechanisms, and also I think I've made this point to legislators too. If you have this robust accountability mechanism, it also protects you from false accusations. You have an ethics commission that can investigate something and say, there's no merit here. And then you can go hang your hat on that and say, this third party group whose job it is to determine, if the state code of ethics has been violated, has said it hasn't been violated. So don't run campaign ads about the false information that's out there. So it also serves as a security blanket for public officials who are doing the right thing.
So Christina, are there other commissions or boards out there within the state that you can get to assist you to want this and make this a more robust commission? Like, for example, maybe the Women's Commission or who takes up issues. Like, have you reached out to any other boards or commissions to see where they are and how they can assist with making sure that this becomes a top priority and becomes a real ethics commission with enforcement power?
I mean, it's something we're really thinking about when we go into next year, because we realize there's going to have to be a lot more, voices pushing for a robust ethics commission than just us. And just, there's others like, Vote for Vermont and Campaign for Vermont and the League of Women Voters. But I think there's also the question of what role should the Ethics Commission play in that, because we're very careful about how we establish relationships with other governmental entities because we are independent. And so that's something that was discussed quite frequently this last legislative session. I don't want to delve too deeply into the constitutional issues, but the way ethics commissions are set up in other states is that they are set up for administrative purposes only in a branch of government, which the Ethics Commission in Vermont is, and that's really supposed to resolve these separation of powers issues. For some reason, was just completely kind of ignored as an argument this year, or people didn't want to accept that. But I think we're very careful about how we interact with others in terms of forming a coalition, because we do have this responsibility to remain completely independent. So if we work too closely with other governmental entities, well, at some point a complaint might come to our office about that entity, and we don't want people to perceive preferential treatment.
I would say
What's
that
your
is
thought?
absolutely, yeah, that's absolutely something we're going to be doing. We had a coalition when we passed the 2017 legislation that created the commission, we included League of Women Voters, it included the Secretary of State's office, it included Vermont Public Interest Research Group. as well as several others. We had a robust coalition of groups and across Vermont that helped pass that legislation. And unfortunately, we kind of let that go over time, thinking that there was enough momentum behind this. We didn't need to maintain that coalition. And now it's kind of clear to us that we do. We need to rebuild that. And so we're going to spend time over the next year or so rebuilding that coalition, getting those folks to the table in unison to try to continue to move ethics legislation forward in Vermont.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. So, Christina, any last words you'd like to tell our constituents here?
I just say I really think the legislature needs to hear from members of the public that this is an issue that's important to them, because last year really showed us, I guess, what was controversial about this year about the bill that was passed last year, or what was the push for this rollback of the Ethics Commission's powers, was just a provision in the ethics legislation that required investigatory entities to receive confidential, non-binding advice from us. And so if somebody can see that as something that is encroaching on their powers or something that shouldn't be happening, I think the public should really be worried, like that there's pushback about this idea that somebody really does not want to hear just not confidential, non-binding advice from the Ethics Commission. So why? Why would they not want to hear that? What is the real reason for that? I'm still left asking myself, what is the reason for this, to be honest? So I really think legislators really need to hear from their constituents. And I think, we're still trying to figure out the best way to kind of help educate legislators that are not on the relevant committees to really understand, the issues that have been involved with these bills, because I think there's kind of, there's a lack of understanding maybe of the constitutional issues at play. So last year when we were before the House Government Operations, they never heard from outside constitutional law experts. And so those outside experts, when they testified before the Senate, they said, no constitutional issues here. But even the House committee didn't get to hear those arguments. And so I think there's just a lot of, education that needs to happen, really, about what's actually going on with these bills, so that we're not in a place where the Constitution kind of ends up being an excuse to roll back, the accountability framework, instead of, just really saying, when there are real constitutional issues, of course, that's an issue. We've never argued against anything that we consider, a real constitutional issue. But when we see a situation where the Constitution is kind of being used as a cover for something, that's when we personally become concerned. But there's only so much we can do about it when I think the legislature isn't also hearing from members of the public about these issues as well.
Understood. Ben, anything you would like to say here? And I do want both of you to come back again.
Appreciate that.
Topic, because this is a hot topic.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is an important topic, and thanks for having us on. I think, I would just echo what Christina said. Write your legislators. If you want to keep up with what's going on, go to Campaign for Vermont, sign up for our newsletter, sign up for our legislative updates. We are covering this every single week, topics like this and others. And so if you want to stay in the loop about what's going on, go follow us there and write your legislators. Tell them ethics are important, and we expect more than what we have now.
Yeah, I'd say especially leadership.
And they can sign up, right?
I'd say especially leadership as well. So I think, ultimately the House and Senate, the leadership has the ability to kind of stop things in their tracks or move things forward. So they especially need to hear the voices, because people always ask me, well, who should I reach out to specifically? So I say leadership, as well as the committee members for House and Senate government operations, especially the committee chairs and vice chairs.
Excellent. So Ben, then when people go to Campaign for Vermont, they can also fill in to get your newsletters, correct? There's a way to sign up for that. Right?
Yes. So if you go to campaignforvermont.org and you go to take action, there's an option there to contact your legislator. So you can do that. We have a tool for you to use. But you can also hit join us. And then when you do that and sign up for our email list, there's our general newsletter list when you go to that join us page. As well as our legislative updates. So you can choose one or the other or both. And that way, newsletters once a month, the legislative updates are once a week when the legislature's in session. And that way you can keep up with what's going on.
Thank you. So I want to thank both of you experts for being here. You are always such valuable guests. And I want to thank NEK-TV and welcome. And now goodbye from Straight Talk Vermont with Linda Joy Sullivan. And we will see you next week. Thank you.